The morning sun hit Marcus Chen's driveway in a way that made the new EV charger gleam like a trophy. He'd saved for 2 years for this moment. The white Tesla Model 3, the Level 2 home charger mounted on the side of his modest ranch house. The whole sustainable future he'd been reading about since his daughter turned 10 and asked him why their car made the sky sick. Now she was 12, and the charger had been up for exactly 3 weeks. Marcus stood in his doorway with a coffee mug that said, "Dad jokes are my superpower," a gift from said daughter Emma, watching the cable trail from the house to the car parked in the driveway. The charger was positioned perfectly, 5 feet from the house, still within his property line, exactly as the installer had calculated and the HOA had approved. He'd even printed out the approval email and shown it to 3 different neighbors just to avoid drama. There was always drama in the Meadowbrook subdivision. There was Mrs. Patterson, who'd called the city about someone's grass being aggressively green, and Rick Thornton, who'd created a private Facebook group just to complain about parking angles. Marcus had moved here because Emma's mother, his ex-wife, Susan, lived 2 blocks away, and he wanted to maintain their shared custody arrangement without a 20-minute drive between houses. He'd thought a quiet cul-de-sac would be peaceful. He'd been profoundly naive. "Dad, are you going to stand there all morning?" Emma appeared behind him, backpack slung over one shoulder, her black hair covering one eye in that way that made him feel approximately 90 years old. She was obsessed with some K-pop group. He couldn't keep up. "Just admiring the beauty of environmentally conscious transportation," Marcus said, taking another sip of coffee. It had gone lukewarm. Life hack, always drink coffee immediately. "It's a car, Dad." "Your car, technically. I paid for it, but you'll be driving it in 4 years when you get your permit, and I want you to remember that I was cool enough to buy electric." Emma rolled her eyes, a full, theatrical production that suggested he'd just suggested they rename the family dog, #, and headed toward the kitchen. "Are you dropping me at school or am I taking the bus?" "Bus today. I've got a meeting at 9. Marcus was a software architect for a mid-sized tech company that had recently gone fully remote, except for quarterly meetings. The quarterly meetings required him to sit in a beige conference room in a beige office building and confirm, in real time, that yes, he was still alive and capable of using Slack. The commute was 35 minutes. He'd packed his laptop already. The morning proceeded as mornings did. Emma grabbed her lunch from the fridge. He'd remembered to pack it yesterday, kissed him on the forehead, something she was beginning to phase out of her behavior, he noticed with the melancholy of a father watching his daughter grow up, and headed to the bus stop. Marcus showered, dressed in the kind of business casual that felt like a uniform for men his age, and backed his old Honda out of the garage. He parked it on the street, a habit from his apartment days, and left the driveway clear for the charger, for the car that was his daughter's future. The meeting was as beige and pointless as expected. 4 hours of discussing Q4 projections, a 30-minute tangent about whether remote workers needed ergonomic chair stipends. They didn't, according to accounting, and a motivational speech from his VP that included the phrase synergistic optimization twice. By the time Marcus got home at 3:15 p.m., his brain felt like it had been microwaved. He pulled up to his driveway, already thinking about microwaving something actual, maybe some leftover pad thai, and noticed something that made his foot slip off the accelerator. The charger cable was gone. Not gone in the sense of unplugged and coiled neatly on the driveway. Gone, absent. The metal connector that should have been attached to his car was just missing. The Tesla sat in the driveway like a broken toy, fully uncharged, the battery percentage completely drained from 40% to 0. According to the app, he'd anxiously check every hour, a habit he was embarrassed about. The last charging session had been interrupted at 3:47 a.m. Marcus parked the Honda and got out slowly, as if approaching a crime scene. He walked to the Tesla, checked the port. No visible damage, no note, nothing. He pulled out his phone to check the car's internal camera footage, then remembered he'd only gotten the basic package. The cameras didn't have night vision. The footage would be useless. But the home security system. That system he had splurged on. 2 cameras in the front, motion-activated, night vision, cloud storage, the works. He'd installed it 6 months ago after some kid had egged the house during the Halloween season. Susan had suggested it was overkill. Marcus had suggested that being prepared was better than being surprised. Apparently, he was going to be very prepared for this particular surprise. He went inside and pulled up the security app on his laptop. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear exactly, but from that peculiar mixture of violation and curiosity that comes from knowing someone has done something to your property. The footage was there. 3:45 a.m., a figure appeared at the edge of the driveway. The timestamp rolled. 3:46. The figure moved closer and Marcus's stomach tightened. He recognized her immediately. Corinne Mitchell lived 3 houses down and 1 over at the corner lot. She was the president of the HOA Architectural Committee, which meant she had opinions about everything. The shade of gray that acceptable garage doors could be painted, the acceptable distance of planters from the sidewalk, the acceptable volume at which other people could exist. She'd called Marcus twice about the charger before he'd even installed it, asking whether he'd submitted proper documentation, whether the installation company was HOA approved, whether he'd considered the visual impact on the neighborhood aesthetic. He'd answered yes to all of it and submitted approximately 7,000 documents. She'd sent a passive-aggressive email that began with, "I'm not trying to be difficult, but," and proceeded to be aggressively difficult for 3 paragraphs. And now at 3:47 a.m., there she was on his security footage, wearing a burgundy windbreaker and an expression of righteous fury. Her hands gripped the charging cable. She yanked, once, twice, 3 times. The car's alarm activated, a high-pitched emergency beep, and Corinne jerked back as if the car had bitten her. But she didn't leave. She stood there for another 30 seconds, breathing heavily. You could see her shoulders moving, and then she did something that made Marcus's breath catch. She looked directly at the camera, not at it in the sense of noticing it, but at it. Eyes narrowed, jaw set, like she was making a promise or issuing a threat. Then she held up the charging cable, the disconnected, dangling charging cable, like it was evidence in a trial where she'd already decided she'd won. She tucked it under her arm and walked away down the sidewalk. The video ended at 3:52 a.m. Marcus sat back in his chair. His coffee, a fresh cup he'd made after getting home, was going cold again. He watched the footage twice more, then pulled up the timestamps from the charging sessions. The car had been charging since 8:00 p.m. the previous evening. 8 hours of uninterrupted charging, and then at 3:47 a.m., someone had manually disconnected it. Someone, Corinne. The question was, why? He opened his email and searched for her previous messages. They spilled out like a landslide, concerns about the charger, questions about its safety, suggestions that it was obstructing the visual flow of the street. One email from 2 weeks ago had said, "I understand you feel ownership of this charger, but it is in the right-of-way area. That makes it public property. We should all be able to use it." Marcus had replied, politely, carefully, as if negotiating with a bomb. "Hi, Corinne, the charger is on my property, which has been confirmed by the surveyor and the HOA approval. It's meant for my personal vehicle. Thanks for your concern." She'd responded within minutes. "Well, I still think it's something we should discuss at the next HOA meeting." She'd brought it up at the HOA meeting. Marcus had attended specifically because he'd known she would. The meeting had been about 3 things: the charger, someone's hedge being 2 inches too high, and whether the neighborhood could have a community garden. Corinne had spent 15 minutes on the charger, suggesting that because it was technically near the street, it should be treated as a community resource. Someone could charge their car whenever they needed. It was a neighborhood amenity. The HOA president, David, bless him, had reminded Corinne that private property was private property, and that the charger was clearly approved and positioned within Marcus's lot line. The meeting had moved on. Corinne had sat back in her chair, lips pursed, and Marcus had seen the exact moment when something shifted behind her eyes. Now he knew what had shifted. She decided to take the law, or at least the cable, into her own hands. Marcus picked up his phone and called the non-emergency police line. Officer Patricia Reeves arrived at Marcus's driveway 45 minutes later, which was approximately 44 minutes longer than Marcus had expected. He'd been under the impression that breaking into someone's property and disconnecting their vehicle was at least some kind of crime. Grand theft cable, trespassing with malicious intent, harassment by disconnection. Officer Reeves was a woman in her late 50s with the kind of face that had seen every argument the world had to offer and found them all tedious. She looked at the security footage on his laptop, listened to Marcus explain the situation, and sighed in a way that suggested she'd also dealt with neighborhood disputes before. "So you want to press charges against Corinne Mitchell for unplugging your car?" She said it like she was confirming his order at a restaurant. "So you want the salad dressing on the side?" I want to know what the law says about someone trespassing on my property and damaging my equipment. The cable isn't damaged. Officer Reeves had a practical way of speaking, direct. And technically, she only disconnected it. It's not like she stole the car or even the cable. It's still here. She gestured at the cable, which Marcus had brought inside and laid on his kitchen table like a piece of evidence from a murder scene. She also disabled my car. It died at 0 battery. Did she know the car was fully charged, or that it would die while unplugged? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. He hadn't thought about this. Coren's expression in the footage had been furious but not calculating, not like she'd carefully planned the exact amount of damage. She'd looked more like someone acting on principle or rage or some mixture of the two. She left the cable under her arm, Marcus said. That suggests intent. She was taking it. Did you ever see her come back? Marcus checked the footage. After 3:52 a.m., there was nothing. The camera had picked up a neighborhood cat at 4:15 a.m., a garbage truck at 6:00 a.m., and nothing related to Coren Mitchell. Wherever she'd gone with the cable, she hadn't returned it. I have it now, Officer Reeves said, gesturing at the cable on the table. So she either put it back without you noticing or she's got it hidden somewhere. Officer Reeves wrote something in her notebook. I can file a report. But honestly, Mr. Chen, what we're looking at here is a neighborhood dispute that's escalated past civility. I'd recommend talking to her directly or going through the HOA before we talk about pressing charges. Those kinds of cases are expensive to prosecute, and a judge might just tell you both to work it out anyway. Marcus felt something hot flare in his chest. Frustration, anger, the particular brand of rage that comes from being told that the other person's transgression was actually his responsibility to solve. She came to my house at 3:47 in the morning and unplugged my car. I understand, and that's worth documenting, which I'm doing. But unless she does it again, or unless she damaged the equipment, it's a civil matter, not a criminal one. Officer Reeves closed her notebook. The report will be on file. If there's another incident, you call us right away and we can escalate. In the meantime, I'd suggest a conversation. Sometimes these things are just about miscommunication. After Officer Reeves left, Marcus sat on his couch and stared at the security footage again. He'd watched it at least 10 times now, and it never got less surreal. There was Coren Mitchell, a woman he'd exchanged pleasantries with at the mailbox, a woman who served on the HOA Architectural Committee, deliberately walking up to his property at 3:47 a.m. to unplug his car. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You need to stop being selfish with that charger. We should talk about what's best for the neighborhood. He didn't respond. Instead, he called the security company and upgraded his system. Night vision wasn't enough. He wanted motion-activated recording, cloud storage with extended history, and alerts to his phone if anyone came within 10 feet of his driveway after dark. It cost an extra $80 a month. He signed up for it anyway. Then he did something that felt petty but also necessary. He reviewed the HOA bylaws on his laptop, taking screenshots of anything that pertained to common property, private property, right-of-way agreements, and neighborhood amenities. He printed everything and organized it in a folder. If this was going to be a war, he was going to be prepared. Emma came home at 3:45 p.m. and immediately noticed something was wrong. "What's your face doing?" she asked, dropping her backpack by the door. This was her way of asking why he looked like he'd been eating lemons. "Nothing, long day at work." "Your work is dumb. You were on a Zoom call the entire time I left." She wasn't wrong. Marcus managed a weak smile. How was school? Madison got a 47 on her math test, and she deserved it because she didn't study, and I got a 94, and I was nice about it. And then she didn't invite me to her birthday party because apparently I'm insufferable now. Emma said this with the kind of teenage drama that made it seem like the entire friendship had imploded and reformed 17 times in a single day. "Can I charge my AirPods on your new fancy charger?" "It's for the car, not for AirPods." "But it could charge my AirPods if you wanted it to." Marcus found himself smiling despite the Coren situation. This was the thing about Emma. She had the ability to cut through whatever adults were worried about and find the absurdist logic underneath. Yes, technically, if you had the right adapter, you could probably charge AirPods off an EV charger. That was very Emma of her to suggest. "Let me check the manual. Maybe there's a secret AirPods mode I didn't know about." "There should be. That would be a selling point. Charges both cars and tiny wireless earbuds. Revolutionary. Emma had already moved on to the kitchen and was assessing the contents of the refrigerator with the scrutiny of a restaurant critic. Why are we out of those little string cheeses? I thought you didn't like those anymore. I don't, but I also like having options. Options are important, Dad. It's why people get so mad about stupid things. They think they don't have a choice, so they go crazy about the one thing they thought they did control. Emma, his 12-year-old daughter, had just accidentally explained Corinne Mitchell's entire motivation in a single sentence. Marcus made a mental note to buy string cheese and also to listen to his daughter more often. That night around 11 p.m., Marcus checked the new security app. It was working perfectly, night vision was crisp, the motion alerts were sensitive, and the cloud storage was backing up everything seamlessly. He sat up in bed with his laptop, checking the footage from throughout the day, paranoid now. But there was nothing. Just the normal neighborhood stuff, cars, people walking dogs, his neighbor Rick Thornton taking out garbage cans at 8 p.m. like he was performing some kind of ritual. He was about to close the laptop when the app sent him a motion alert. His phone buzzed. Motion detected on front driveway, 11:47 p.m. Marcus's heart rate spiked. He pulled up the live feed and saw nothing. The driveway was empty. Then the footage adjusted and he saw her, Corinne Mitchell, walking slowly down the sidewalk in front of his house, walking really slowly like she was trying to move without detection. She was wearing dark clothes, a hat. Her eyes were on his house. She didn't approach, she just observed, walked past once slowly, came back in the other direction even more slowly, stopped in front of the house for a solid 30 seconds, staring. Then she continued walking and disappeared. Marcus checked the timestamp. It was now 11:49 p.m. He had video evidence of Corinne Mitchell casing his house. He didn't sleep. He sat up with his laptop, watching the feed, his phone charged and ready. Another alert came at 1:15 a.m., a car alarm 3 houses down. At 2:30 a.m., someone's dog barked. At 3:47 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the first incident, Marcus's phone alerted him to motion again. He pulled up the feed immediately. The screen was black, then adjusted, and there was Corinne. But this time she was doing something different. She was carrying something. A cable. Not the cable, but a cable. She had some kind of electric extension cable coiled around her shoulder. She approached his car directly, deliberately. No sneaking this time. She was moving with purpose. She opened the battery door on the Tesla. It was unlocked, which made Marcus's stomach drop, and she tried to connect the extension cable to the car's charging port. The car's alarm went off immediately. The horn blared, the lights flashed, and Corinne, instead of running, stood there facing the camera with the same expression as before, righteous fury. "You're being selfish," she shouted at the camera that she knew was recording her. "You're being selfish, and someone needs to teach you that the world doesn't revolve around you." Then she dropped the cable, walked backward to the street, and disappeared into the darkness. The second police report didn't help much. Officer Reeves came back the next morning, watched the new footage, and said something that made Marcus's legal foundations crumble slightly. "She's attempting to use your property," Officer Reeves said, her tone suggesting she was reading from a script she'd read 1,000 times. "But she's not technically stealing from you. She's not vandalizing. She's trying to charge something, but your car's safety system is preventing her from doing anything. She's coming to my house at 3 a.m. and trying to mess with my car." "I understand that, but what crime is that specifically?" Officer Reeves had kind eyes, which made her direct statement somehow worse. "She's on a public sidewalk when you first see her. When she approaches your car, she's trespassing, sure, but the car's security system is doing its job. She hasn't stolen anything. She hasn't damaged anything. She's just trying to charge a cable. In the middle of the night, on someone else's property, repeatedly. Which is worth documenting, and it is documented." Officer Reeves handed him the second report. "But I'd really suggest you talk to her, or hire a lawyer, or both. What you're describing is harassment, but proving it requires a pattern, and you're only 2 incidents in. You need 3, maybe 4, that, or you need to talk to her and get her to stop." After Officer Reeves left, Marcus called a lawyer. His brother had married someone from a family of attorneys, and one of those attorneys took personal injury cases, but could probably point him toward someone who handled neighborhood disputes. The call lasted 40 minutes and cost him $150 in consultation fees, and the summary was basically this. He could pursue a restraining order, but it would require proving that Karen posed a genuine threat or danger, which 2 incidents at night with no physical violence probably wouldn't support. He could sue for harassment, but she hadn't technically damaged his property, so damages would be hard to quantify. He could install better security and press charges if she trespassed again, but the charges probably wouldn't stick without some kind of escalation. "What you're dealing with," the lawyer, whose name was Tom and who sounded tired, said, "is the legal equivalent of being frustrated. The law protects you from actual harm. It protects you less well from chronic inconvenience and weird neighbor behavior. You might just have to live with her being crazy or escalate it somehow." "Escalate it how?" "That's not legal advice territory. That's where I stop, and you start thinking about whether you want to keep living in this neighborhood or move." Marcus hung up and made a decision. He was going to confront Karen directly. Not angrily, not aggressively, but directly. He'd had it with the passive-aggressive emails, the 3 a.m. cable grabs, the weird nighttime staring at his house. It was time to have an actual conversation. He waited until Saturday morning when Emma was at her mom's place for the weekend, and he walked down to Karen's house. It was a corner lot with a lot of prominent landscaping, very Karen-coded, Marcus thought, everything optimized for maximum visual impact when you drove past. He rang the doorbell. Karen answered in about 3 seconds, which suggested she'd been waiting somewhere near the door. She was wearing activewear and had her blonde, highlighted hair pulled back in an aggressive ponytail. Her expression cycled through surprise, recognition, and then a kind of stiffening that made it clear she'd been expecting this conversation to happen differently than it was. "Marcus, hi. Can we talk?" She opened the door wider, a grudging gesture, but a gesture. He stepped inside and she closed it behind him. The house smelled like vanilla-scented candles and something else, something clinical. Her living room had the kind of furniture arrangement that suggested she'd considered every sight line and optimized them for a magazine shoot. Everything was white or cream or beige. It was like standing inside a Pinterest board about minimalist living. "I know what you're going to say," Karen started before Marcus had even fully entered the room. "And I want you to know that I did it because I care about this neighborhood, because I care about all of us. You came to my house at 3:47 a.m. and unplugged my car." Karen's jaw tightened. "Your charger is in the right-of way. That makes it a public amenity. There's a woman on Oakwood Drive who has an electric car and she parks on the street sometimes. She has to wait hours for a full charge because she doesn't have a driveway. Meanwhile, you have this charger that you're using exclusively for yourself. It's selfish." "It's my property." "But it's in the space of the neighborhood, and some of us think that." "Karen," Marcus said, and his voice was steady in a way that surprised him, "you don't get to decide how my property should be used. And you definitely don't get to trespass on it at 3 a.m. and mess with my car. That's not principle. That's crime." "I didn't damage anything." "You violated my privacy. You violated the security of my home. And you did it deliberately, repeatedly, and at night, which is basically textbook harassment." Karen's face was getting red. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides. "You think you're special. You think because you have money for an electric car and a fancy charger that you're helping the planet. But you're just helping yourself. That's what people like you don't understand. The world is dying and you're charging your car for free while other people—" "My electricity isn't free. I pay for every kilowatt." "But you're not sharing it." "I'm not sharing it," Marcus said, and he felt something cold settle in his chest. "Because it's mine. That's how property works. I don't share my house. I don't share my car. I don't share my electricity. And you don't get to take those things from me because you've decided that your ethical framework requires it." Karen's eyes had filled with tears, which was not what Marcus had expected. He'd expected her to be angrier or defensive or doubling down on her position. Instead, she looked hurt. "You don't understand what it's like," she said quietly. "My daughter has asthma. That charger's running during all night, all hours, using electricity that could be powering a hospital, and meanwhile, she can barely breathe in the summer. And I see you with your car, your nice Tesla, your perfect electric vehicle, and I think about all the people who don't get to have that, who suffer because the people with money get to feel good about themselves without actually what? Changing the world." Marcus felt something shift in him, not sympathy exactly, but a kind of understanding. Karen wasn't just being difficult. She was drowning in her own anxieties and beliefs, and she was trying to bail water with her hands. Karen, I'm sorry your daughter has asthma. That sounds incredibly hard, but my charger didn't cause that. And unplugging my car isn't going to fix it. And coming to my house at 3 a.m. definitely isn't going to fix it. I just needed you to understand. I understand perfectly. And the understanding I have is that you need to stop. You need to stop coming to my house. You need to stop contacting me. And if you don't, I'm going to pursue legal action, and this neighborhood is going to find out exactly what you've been doing at 3 in the morning. He said it calmly, but he meant every word. Karen heard it in his voice because her face went very still. That's a threat. It's a consequence. Marcus left her house and walked back to his own, half expecting her to follow him to escalate further, but she didn't. When he checked the security footage later, there was no sign of her. For 3 days, nothing. No emails, no late-night walks, no attempts to mess with the car. Marcus found himself checking the security feed compulsively, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was like waiting for a dropped object to finally hit the ground. The suspension of it was almost worse than the impact. The shoe dropped on the 4th day, but not in the way he'd expected. He got a call from Susan, Emma's mom, at 2:15 in the afternoon. She sounded upset. "Did you do something to Karen Mitchell?" Susan asked without preamble. "Why?" "Because Emma came home really upset, and she said that Karen said something to her at the grocery store about how some people use their children as props to avoid taking responsibility. And I want to know what the hell that means and what you did to provoke it." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Karen said that to Emma." "Emma said it was directed at you, but she was standing right there, and it really upset her. So yes, you need to tell me what's going on." He told her all of it. The 3 a.m. incident, the second attempt with the extension cable, the visit to Karen's house. Susan listened quietly, and then she said, "You confronted her about this? You went to her house?" "I tried to talk to her, to make her understand that you were the reasonable one, that she was the crazy neighbor." Susan's tone had shifted from upset to disappointed. "Marcus, I've known Karen for 4 years because of Emma. Well, she's a lot, but she's not a bad person. And whatever's going on with her and her environmental guilt or her daughter's asthma or whatever, talking to her like you're going to convince her to stop being crazy is just going to make her feel more attacked. She's committing a crime. She's being weird and inappropriate. There's a difference." Susan sighed. "This is exactly like the thing with your neighbor with the hedge. Remember, you sent him a 17-paragraph email about the HOA regulations, and it took him 6 months to forgive you." "That was different." "It wasn't actually. It was you being technically right in a way that made the other person feel attacked." Susan was quiet for a moment. Can you think about how to handle this in a way that doesn't involve Emma being in the middle of it? Because she was embarrassed at the grocery store. Her friend Madison was there." After Susan hung up, Marcus sat with this. It was true that he'd been technically right about the hedge situation. It was also true that his neighbor Rick Thornton had called him a pedantic asshole at a neighborhood gathering, and they still didn't speak. But that was different from this. This was Karen literally breaking into his property at 3 a.m. Wasn't it? That night, Marcus checked the security feed, and there was no sign of Karen. There was also no sign of her for the next week. Days passed. The charger worked perfectly. The Tesla charged beautifully. Everything was normal except for the fact that Marcus couldn't stop waiting for something to happen. It was 10 days after his visit to Karen's house when the police came back. Officer Reeves didn't look tired this time. She looked unhappy, which was worse. "I'm going to need you to come with me and file a statement," she said when she came to the door. It was Saturday morning. Emma was home. She appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, watching as Marcus grabbed a hoodie. "What happened?" he asked. "Karen Mitchell has filed a complaint." The station smelled like stale coffee and regret. Officer Reeves led Marcus to a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a recording device. There was another officer there, someone Marcus didn't recognize, older, with the kind of expression that suggested he'd heard this story before and didn't like it very much. "Ms. Mitchell has accused you of threatening her," the older officer said, whose name tag read Sergeant Williams. "She says you came to her house and made statements that she felt were threatening in nature. I told her if she didn't stop trespassing on my property, I would pursue legal action. She says you said you'd do something about her. She says you made eye contact in a threatening manner and spoke in a threatening tone." Marcus's brain tried to process this. That's not what I said. I said I'd pursue legal action. That's not a threat. That's a legal consequence. The difference is pretty subjective, Sergeant Williams said. He had the tone of someone who'd already sided with the other person. We've been contacted by her lawyer. She's claiming emotional distress. Says the Charger situation has been escalating a harassment campaign against her. She came to my house at 3 in the morning trying to unplug my car. She says she was trying to make a point about neighborhood resources. She says she never intended to cause damage, and when you confronted her at her home, you became aggressive. I was not aggressive, I was clear. Sergeant Williams made a note. We're documenting this statement, and I'm going to be very clear with you. Any further contact with Ms. Mitchell, direct or indirect, could be construed as harassment. If she calls us again about you, we can pursue charges. Do you understand? Marcus understood. What he understood was that Karen had reframed the narrative. She wasn't the person who'd committed crimes. She was the person who'd felt so threatened by his response that she'd had to get the police involved. It was a brilliant move, actually. Terrible, but brilliant. By complaining first, by getting the police involved, by calling her lawyer, she'd managed to make herself the victim. When Marcus left the police station, he sat in his car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, feeling something hot and bitter expand in his chest. This wasn't fair. This wasn't right. But fairness and rightness were apparently not operative in the legal system, or in neighborhood disputes, or in the way one person's interpretation of events could become the official narrative simply by reaching the police first. He drove home slowly, methodically, thinking. When he got there, Emma was waiting in the driveway with her backpack. "Are you getting arrested?" she asked with the kind of tone that suggested she already knew the answer and had prepared a comment about how funny that would be. "No, but something weird is happening with the neighbor." "Karen? Yeah, I've been talking to Madison about it, and apparently Karen's been talking to a lot of people about your car and how it's destroying the planet or whatever. Madison's mom said it's because Karen feels guilty about having a normal car, and she's projecting that onto you." Madison's mom said that. Madison told me that her mom said that. I might have added the word projecting because that's a psychology term and it makes me sound smart. Emma shrugged. But basically, Karen's losing it. Karen's winning it, actually. Emma got into the car. They were going to Susan's for the weekend, and Marcus explained the situation as he drove. How Karen had flipped the narrative, how she'd made herself the victim, how the police had basically told him that any contact with her would be considered harassment. "So she wins," Emma said thoughtfully, "because she complained first." "Basically. That's stupid. That's like if someone punched you and then told the teacher you were being mean about it." "But it works," Marcus said, "because the teacher has no way of knowing what really happened. They just know that one person complained about another person." "So you need proof." Marcus glanced at his daughter. She was 12 and sitting in his car, suggesting that he needed evidence. The security footage he already had suddenly seemed inadequate. Karen hadn't explicitly threatened him, hadn't done anything actionable on camera except disconnect the cable and try to connect an extension cable. The second encounter, she'd made sure to do it late enough that the lighting was dim. She was smart. Or at least she'd become smart. "I do," Marcus said. That night, he called Susan and told her he needed to make some adjustments to his schedule. Emma would need to stay with him more often, which worked because he could adjust his work schedule to be more flexible. Susan agreed, which suggested she didn't quite believe Marcus had done anything threatening to Karen, but also didn't want to be in the middle of it. The next week, Marcus filed his own police report about Karen's original nighttime visit. Officer Reeves was matter-of-fact about it. She documented it, noted that it confirmed his earlier complaint, and said that if Karen approached him again, he should contact her immediately. She didn't say what would happen if he did, just that he should. The waiting began again. Days passed. 2 weeks. Marcus checked the security footage obsessively, but Karen never came back. She didn't email, she didn't call, she just didn't exist in his life anymore, which was somehow more unsettling than the alternative. Then, on day 16, an email appeared in his inbox from the HOA president. There was a special meeting scheduled about neighborhood charging infrastructure and equitable access to community resources. It was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. Marcus knew what that meant. Karen had got her allies, and she was going to make her case in front of the entire neighborhood. The HOA meeting was held in the community center. a small beige building with folding chairs and a microphone that had been installed specifically because the meetings were always too loud. Marcus arrived early and saw Karen already there, sitting in the front row with her arms crossed, flanked by two other women who were nodding supportively. David, the HOA president, waved at Marcus apologetically. David was a good guy who just wanted everyone to get along and had the unhappy job of mediating disputes between people who fundamentally didn't want to. About 30 neighbors showed up. Marcus recognized most of them: the couple with the aggressive landscaping, Rick Thornton and his wife, Mrs. Patterson, a few people he'd never actually met. Emma was with Susan in the back, watching with the kind of intensity that suggested she was taking notes for a future book about suburban dysfunction. David called the meeting to order and explained that there had been a request to discuss the new EV charging infrastructure in the neighborhood. Karen had prepared a presentation, which seemed to involve a lot of color-printed photographs of the charger from different angles, a pie chart about neighborhood electricity usage, and a pamphlet about environmental justice that she'd printed from some website. "Thank you all for coming," Karen said into the microphone, and her voice was steady, calm, entirely reasonable. "I want to start by saying that I have the utmost respect for Marcus Chen and his decision to adopt electric vehicle technology. I think it's wonderful. What I'm here to talk about is making sure that access to that technology isn't just available to people with the financial means to install private charging infrastructure." She clicked to the next slide. It was a photo of a woman, the woman from Oakwood Drive, Marcus assumed, sitting in her car looking tired. "This is Janet," Karen continued. "Janet has an electric car, but she parks on the street because she doesn't have a driveway. She has to wait 6 hours for a full charge. Meanwhile, in our neighborhood, there's a charger that sits in a driveway, available only to one person, while our electricity grid struggles with demand and our carbon footprint." "Actually," David interrupted gently, "I think we should clarify the question. The question isn't about the charger being available to everyone. The question is whether Marcus is entitled to install a charging station on his own property, which he is. The HOA approved it." "But we could make it a community resource," Karen said, and Marcus heard the desperation starting to crack through her reasonable facade. "We could require that." "We can't require that," David said. "That would be taking Marcus's property and making it public. That's not legal." Karen's face was getting red. "But it's in the right-of way." "No, it isn't. The surveyor confirmed it's within his property line." What happened next happened very fast. Karen stood up, her eyes filling with tears, and said something that changed everything. "My daughter can't breathe because people like you are too selfish to think about the future. My daughter has asthma, and she has asthma because the world is choking, and all of you are just sitting here protecting your stuff instead of protecting her." The room went very quiet. And then Marcus did something he hadn't planned to do. He stood up. "Karen, I'm sorry your daughter has asthma. That sounds really hard," he said, and he meant it. "But my charging my car isn't causing her asthma, and you unplugging my car at 3 in the morning isn't helping her either. What it is doing is making the rest of us afraid in our own homes. I was trying to make a point. You broke into my property multiple times. You tried to use your own equipment to damage my car. You did that at night deliberately, knowing I had a camera and hoping that either I wouldn't check it or that I'd be too scared to do anything about it." Karen was shaking. Her allies had gone very quiet. Even Rick Thornton looked uncomfortable, which Marcus didn't think was possible. "And then," Marcus continued, "when I confronted you about it, you went to the police and accused me of threatening you, which made me the bad guy, which made your crime disappear and my legitimate response become the focus. I was just trying to make yourself the victim. Yeah, I know, and it worked. For about 2 weeks it worked. But the thing about trying to reframe a narrative like that is that everyone with eyes can see what actually happened." Marcus pulled out his phone. He'd brought the video on a USB drive and asked David to set up the projector. David, who looked like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else, came to the front and helped Marcus connect the feed. Then in front of everyone, he played it, all of it. The first incident at 3:47 a.m., Karen yanking the cable with both hands, the car alarm going off, her staring at the camera. The second incident, the extension cable, her yelling at the camera about how selfish he was. And then the third incident, the one he hadn't mentioned to anyone yet, which had happened the night before he went to her house. Karen on his property, trying to cut the charging cable with a pair of bolt cutters. That one made everyone in the room gasp. When the footage ended, David looked at Karen with an expression that suggested their friendship was over. "Karen," he said quietly, "what was that?" "I was trying to make a point about shared resources," Karen said, but her voice was no longer reasonable. It was cracking. "I was trying to show. You were trying to destroy Marcus's property." David turned to the rest of the room. "I'm going to file a report with the police department about this, and I'm going to recommend that we evaluate Karen's continued service on the architectural committee." Karen gathered her papers with shaking hands. Her allies had evaporated. Mrs. Patterson was looking at her with something like pity. Rick Thornton had actually turned his chair away from her. As Karen was leaving, she passed by Emma. Emma, in the way that 12-year-olds sometimes have, made eye contact and simply said, "That was dumb." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't aggressive. It was just the simple observation of a child watching an adult destroy their own credibility in real time. Karen didn't come back to the neighborhood after that. Marcus found out 3 days later that she'd hired movers. She was selling her house. The listing went up on a Thursday. She was gone by the following Monday. The silence that followed Karen's departure was profound. Marcus expected some kind of vindication, some sense of justice, but what he got instead was something closer to emptiness. The charger still worked. The car still charged. But something about the neighborhood felt different, haunted, like they'd all seen something in Karen that they'd been denying existed in themselves, the ability to justify anything if you believed hard enough in the righteousness of your cause. The HOA issued a formal statement about respecting property boundaries and community standards. Rick Thornton sent Marcus an awkward text that said, "Hey man, for what it's worth, I think you handled that well." Mrs. Patterson invited him and Emma to a block party at the end of the month, as if nothing had happened and they were all going to move on with their lives. But Emma had changed something in Marcus. She'd seen him at his most vulnerable, watched him document a neighbor's crimes, participate in the police investigation, present evidence at an HOA meeting. She'd seen justice work in a way. Karen had left, her reputation destroyed, her point lost. But she'd also seen how messy justice was, how much of it depended on who could present a better narrative, and how sometimes the person who was technically wrong could still damage the person who was technically right. One evening, about a week after Karen moved, Marcus and Emma stood in the driveway, watching the Tesla charge. "Does it feel good?" Emma asked, having her leave. "It feels weird," Marcus said honestly. "Like I won, but I'm not sure what I was supposed to win at." "You were supposed to win at having your car charged." "I think the car was just the excuse." "For what?" Marcus thought about this. About Karen's daughter with asthma, about Janet on Oakwood Drive who had to wait 6 hours for a charge, about the climate guilt and environmental anxiety, and the way that modern life required constant ethical compromises. He thought about how he'd installed that charger because he wanted to feel like he was doing something right, and how Karen had unplugged it because she felt like he wasn't doing enough. "For the fact that we're all scared," he said finally, "about different things, and sometimes we hurt each other because we're trying to protect what we're scared of losing." "That's very philosophical," Emma said, "and also boring." Marcus laughed, and it was genuine. "Thank you, I needed that." "You're welcome. Also, can I ask you something?" Emma was looking at the charger. "If someone like Karen asked really nicely, could they charge their car here sometimes, like just occasionally?" "Do you want me to offer them the charger?" "I want to know if you would if they asked nicely." Marcus considered this. The answer was yes. If someone had approached him and said, "I have an electric car but no driveway and I'm struggling to find a place to charge it," he probably would have let them use the charger. He had enough electricity. It was just a cable. The only thing that had prevented that scenario was that Karen hadn't asked. She demanded. She'd trespassed. She'd tried to take what she felt was fair without asking if fairness might be available if she just asked. "Yes," he said, "I think I would." "You should probably tell people that," Emma said, "so nobody else does what Karen did." So he did. Marcus sent an email to the neighborhood HOA explaining that while his charger was private property and his legal right, he was willing to occasionally allow neighbors to use it if they had legitimate need and asked beforehand. He gave it to David to share at the next meeting. 3 people took him up on it over the next 6 months. Janet from Oakwood Drive charged her car there twice. An elderly woman whose garage charger was broken used it while hers was being repaired. And a teenage boy from the neighborhood came over one afternoon to charge his electric scooter before a road trip. None of them were Karen. Karen had moved to a different city. Marcus heard through the HOA gossip network that she'd started a community advocacy group for charging station infrastructure. He didn't know if that was true. He didn't ask. The security cameras remained installed, but Marcus stopped checking them obsessively. The footage of Karen's visits remained backed up to the cloud just in case. He never had to use it. She never came back. No one ever tried to unplug his car again. But every morning, when Marcus walked out to see the Tesla charging in the driveway, he thought about the woman in the burgundy jacket, the one with the daughter with asthma and the guilt about her own choices, and the belief that if she just pushed hard enough, if she was just righteous enough, she could force the world into being what she thought it should be. He thought about the difference between being right and being kind, about how sometimes you had to choose between them, and about how the person who chose to be kind first, who asked, who listened, who admitted their own uncertainties, usually ended up being right anyway, but for better reasons. One evening, Emma and Marcus were sitting on the porch, watching the charger work. "Do you think Karen's happier now?" Emma asked. "I don't know, probably not." "Why not?" "Because she left, but she didn't change. She still thinks everyone is selfish. She just proved her point and lost her house instead of having a conversation." Emma nodded, processing this. "So the moral of the story is that having a camera doesn't help because it just makes you think that being right on video is the same as being right in life." "That's a pretty good moral," Marcus said. "I know, I'm going to remember that." And she did. Years later, when Emma was in college studying environmental science, she'd reference that moment. She'd talk about Karen Mitchell in papers about environmental activism and the psychology of righteous anger. She'd use it as an example of how good intentions could go bad, and how filming evidence of someone's wrongdoing didn't actually change the fundamental wrongness of the situation. It just made it official. Marcus never told her the rest of the story. That he'd been afraid, that he'd checked the security footage obsessively, that part of him had wanted Karen to come back so he could prove that he'd been right all along. That he'd felt violated and violated back, in his own way, through the presentation at the HOA meeting. That justice, even when you won it, tasted like something complicated. But Emma figured it out on her own. She was smart like that. The Tesla charged in the driveway for another 3 years before Marcus traded it in for a newer model. The charger was uninstalled and sold to someone else who'd bought a house 2 neighborhoods over. The story became neighborhood legend, the woman who'd been driven out by video evidence and her own righteous anger. Sometimes, years later, when Marcus would see a news story about environmental activism or neighborhood disputes, he'd think about Karen Mitchell. He'd think about how she'd woken up one morning and decided that what was in her heart justified what she did with her hands. He'd think about how the camera had saved him, but it hadn't saved her. And he'd be grateful that Emma had asked him, on that driveway, if he would have shared the charger. Because if he'd heard her say, yes, earlier, before everything else happened, maybe Karen would have too. But maybe not. Some people, Marcus had learned, don't believe that kindness is possible. They've been burning too long from their own guilt to feel the warmth of anyone else's hand reaching out.